Indeed, courts have the duty to safeguard the liberty of all peoples. Very recently, in Hamdan versus Rumsfeld, decided on June 29, 2006, the United States Supreme Court held that a military commission convened to try a Yemeni national captured in Afghanistan lacked the power to proceed because, if I may quote the United States Supreme Court, its structure and procedure violate both the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the Geneva Conventions, unquote, on the matter. Holding that the military commission afforded less protection than that guaranteed under those laws, the U.S. Supreme Court noted substantial deviations from the fundamental rights accorded to the accused, such as those precluding defendants and their counsel from learning what evidence was to be presented against them during any part of the proceedings, and those involving the admission of any evidence, such as hearsay testimony that has not been sworn to and statements gathered through coercion. In Rasul versus Bush, decided on June 28, 2004, a case also originating from the hostilities in Afghanistan, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that its district courts had the jurisdiction to consider challenges to the legality of the detention of aliens, who in that case were Australians and Kuwaitis captured abroad and incarcerated at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. For sure, many other jurisdictions, especially those represented today, must have ruled on matters similar to those I have mentioned. Hence, we ask for your active participation so that we may learn from one another's experiences, decisions, and advocacies. While safeguarding liberty is a traditional and fairly common task for the judiciary, the nurturing of prosperity may not be too familiar to many courts. Some jurisdictions may even take the view that the judiciary need not exert conscious thought and effort to nurture progress. Nonetheless, I maintain that whatever the status of a country's economic progress, courts must contribute to the achievement or the nurturance of prosperity, or at the very least, to the alleviation of poverty, disease, and disability. Important world events impel me to advocate a necessary, nay indispensable nexus between political liberty and economic prosperity, which I will explain shortly. First, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we refer to as UDHR, which was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations on December 10, 1948, has emerged as the fundamental law of human rights. The UDHR recognizes the entitlement of the common people to liberty and prosperity. This fact is evident in the following provisions of its preamble. And I quote, "Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equality and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas the peoples of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. Close quotation. The UDHR also recognizes, aside from the basic right to life, liberty, and security of persons, their right to economic, cultural, and social rights. In the Philippines, our 1987 Constitution commands the state to, and I quote our Constitution, promote a just and dynamic social order that will ensure the prosperity and independence of the nation and free the people from poverty. Close quotation. Equally significant, Article 12 on the national economy and patrimony mandates, and I quote again our Constitution, a more equitable distribution of opportunities, income and wealth, a sustained increase in the amount of goods and services produced by the nation for the benefit of the people, and an expanding productivity as the key to raising the quality of life for all, especially the underprivileged. Close quotation. Our Constitution likewise demands the institution of social justice. That these provisions are not self-executory does not in any way diminish their legal significance. They direct the legislature to enact laws to alleviate poverty, and they provide the courts with a juridical context within which to interpret other constitutional provisions and laws. Second, development. Another impetus to my twin advocacies pertain to developments in the private sector. More and more people around the world are realizing the need to fight poverty and deprivation and are pooling enormous resources and talents to combat this common menace. For starters, Time Magazine's Persons of the Year 2005, the world's richest multi-billionaire couple, Bill and Melinda Gates, have staged their own campaign for vaccinations and public health care. Their target, to save 700,000 lives. Billionaire investment guru Warren Buffett has joined the crusade with a mind-boggling $30 billion donation of blue-chip Berkshire Hathaway stocks to the Gates Foundation. Just last September of this year, billionaire financier George Soros announced that he was contributing $50 million to the Millennium Villages project. This non-governmental initiative seeks to show that closely focused developmental projects can alleviate severe poverty within a few years. Even the famed Nobel Peace Foundation has veered its lenses to poverty alleviation as it awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to Bangladeshi Muhammad Yunus a few days ago on October 14, 2006. He and his Grameen Bank had pioneered microcredit and proved that the poor's misfortunes could be transformed by helping them become self-employed. Over 6.6 million impoverished Bangladeshis have availed themselves of these microloans I mentioned. Philanthropic endeavors in Asia have likewise brought back hope to the homeless, the blind, the poor, and the neglected. This year, 6 exceptional Asians and 1 exemplary organization were awarded by the Ramon Magsaysay Foundation, Asia's equivalent of the Nobel Prize. Later, one of these awardees, Mr. Antonio Meloto, will share with us civil society's experience in arousing civic consciousness through their organization known as Gawad Kalinga Community Development Foundation. This has been largely instrumental in building private mass housing for slum dwellers in the Philippines and other Asian countries. Third, still another factor behind the call for both liberty and prosperity is the growing consensus among developmental institutions that a stable judiciary and a firmly established rule of law system are necessary means to achieve liberty and prosperity. Institutions like the United Nations Development Program, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank have realized that poverty alleviation and economic growth cannot be attained unless there is, open quotation, a well-functioning judicial system that enables the state to regulate the economy and empower private individuals to contribute to economic development by confidently engaging in business, investments, and other transactions. Close quotation. This stance explains why the UNDP is passionate about broadening the poor's access to justice, why the World Bank wants, open quotation, an effective and efficient judicial system that protects citizens from the abuses of government and safeguards the rights of the poor, close quotation, and why the ADB desires, open quotation, to enhance the effectiveness and the accountability of the judiciary, close quotation. In the audiovisual presentation we have just witnessed a little earlier, ADB President Kuruda and World Bank's Joaquin von Amsberg discussed the necessary nexus between progress and a stable rule of law environment. Both agree that the rule of law forms the foundation of sustained economic development. If I may paraphrase Mr. Amsberg, law and justice are basic ingredients of development. Thus, it is his submission, and I agree, that there is no choice to be made between liberty and prosperity. Both are imperative paradigms in society. For the same reason, President Kuroda observed that the People's Republic of China is undergoing a massive law reform program so that it may continue to play a critical role in world economy. In the light of these three major developments, among several others, I am convinced that the prosperity of the peoples of the world requires as much nurturing in the present century as that accorded to liberty in the past. These developments have instilled in me my advocacy of justice and jobs, freedom and food, integrity and investment, ethics and economics, democracy and development, in short, liberty and prosperity. Pursuant to this effort to protect liberty and to promote prosperity, our Philippine judiciary has leaned towards a dual standard of judicial review. First, in cases involving liberty, the scales of justice weigh heavily against the government and in favor of the people, especially the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized, the dispossessed, and the weak. Laws and actions of government and its instrumentalities restricting fundamental rights of our people come to the courts highly suspect in their constitutional validity. Second, in cases involving prosperity and developmental issues, deference is generally accorded to the political branches of our government, namely the presidency and Congress. Let me add that as a rule, Philippine courts do not pass upon the merits or wisdom of economic policies. These are matters that have been left by our people to the President and to Congress to evaluate and decide. This judicial no-interference rule on economic policy does not mean, though, that our courts in the Philippines will abdicate their duty of striking down what we call grave abuse of discretion. As many of you may know, our judiciary has been vested by our Constitution with a unique duty to nullify not just legislative or executive acts that clearly violate the Constitution, the laws, or settled jurisprudence, but also that those that have been issued with arbitrariness, whim, caprice, bias, personal hostility, all of which are commonly referred to as grave abuse of discretion. To the first acts, those contrary to the Constitution and the law, courts in general claim an inherent mandate flowing from judicial power. I suppose, though, that the second category is peculiarly Filipino. It traces its origin to the previous dictatorial regime, the magnitude and monstrosity of which were described earlier in our audiovisual presentation by our former President, Corazon Aquino. Concretely, there have been indeed instances when courts had to perform a delicate balancing act between the demands of liberty and the needs of prosperity. In British Columbia Securities Commission versus Branch, the Supreme Court of Canada had to choose between the freedom from testimonial compulsion and the right of the government to compel a company's officers to attend an examination under oath and to produce all pieces of information and records in their possession as provided under that country's Securities Act. Ruling in favor of the Securities Commission, the Canadian Court noted, and I quote the Canadian Court, "The effective implementation of securities legislation, which has obvious implication on the nation's material prosperity, depends on the willingness of those who choose to engage in the securities trade to comply with defined standards of conduct." Close quotation. As the world marches for the proper balance between liberty and prosperity and a model for economic development, various theories have been proposed. For instance, Professor William Easterly, who has recently published a book entitled Elusive Quest for Growth, opined that most economically advanced countries had adopted liberal democracy in which human rights were zealously protected. Those felt comfortable and invested their money for the long term, thereby propelling stable economies. But when confronted with other models of economic prosperity in Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe during a roundtable conference we have had, he had to concede that there was no single formula for rapid economic growth. Another theory proposed to explain how progress has been made possible in some countries of the world relates to a country's stability and progress to the degree to which it is, open quotation, open, close quotation, both within its borders and to the outside world. What is interesting about this theory is that it attempts to provide a framework both for countries that owe their stability and progress to their success in isolating themselves from the outside world on the one hand, and on the other to those whose stability may be traced to their openness to social, political, and economic change. Countries' legal systems, whether common law or civil law. They are Rafael Laporta, an Argentinian, Florencio Lopez de Silanes, a Mexican, Andrei Scheffler, a Russian who immigrated to the United States when he was 15 years old, and Robert Vishny. Their theory has given rise to what is known as, open quotation, law and finance, close quotation. According to this school of thought, common law countries are more economically advanced than those subscribing to civil law. The former allegedly tend to be less corrupt and purport to protect both shareholders and creditors better than civil law countries do. The evidence supporting this theory, however, is hardly absolute. Earlier in the audiovisual presentation, Mr. Amsberg of the World Bank described how various countries dealt with the issues of liberty and prosperity within their social, cultural, economic, and political milieus. According to him, historically, the United States placed greater emphasis on individual freedom, European societies on equality, while some African and Asian countries with flourishing economies on strong states. Our own experience in the Philippines demonstrates that liberty and prosperity must go hand in hand. One cannot be sacrificed for the other. After all, during the years of martial law, authoritarian rule was proven to be incapable of producing meaningful long-term economic progress. Even more important, our people value their freedoms very dearly and will not exchange them for food. Indeed, the Filipinos may endure occasional hunger, but they will never tolerate injustice and indignity for long. I have attempted, ladies and gentlemen, as best as I could, to present the twin beacons of liberty and prosperity in the context of history, as well as of existing and emerging realities in many countries. How to find the right balance between these two paradigms may be found in each country's unique circumstances. By no means is the perception of balance in one country to be taken as an absolute prescription for others. I hope, though, that through an exchange of ideas, information, and best practices during this forum, all countries and sectors represented may be able to evaluate the value of the shared experiences and to imbibe this as they may deem appropriate under their unique environmental circumstances. Senator Angara, one of the leaders of our legislative branch, made an incisive point in the audiovisual presentation prior to my speech. He said that the matter of how best to calibrate the balance between liberty and prosperity must be left to the people of a particular country. Indeed, each country and each sector of society has its own history, experience, temperament, economics, culture, and politics, which should determine how viable liberty and prosperity would be in its jurisdiction. Nonetheless, I present liberty and prosperity as the framework within which the various countries' courts, congresses, parliaments, cabinets, bar associations, judicial institutes, academies, business communities, and civil society may formulate their missions and visions for the future. They may do well to rally around the commonalities of our country's experiences rather than on our differences. I believe that should this forum be able to discuss these varying approaches to balancing liberty and prosperity and later find some common areas from which some understanding could be culled and a program of action drawn, our gathering together during these 3 significant days in October 2006 would have been fruitful and successful. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chief Justice. We are sure that your message will inspire our very distinguished participants to likewise share their expertise and experiences and learn from each other during this three-day event that we all look forward to. May I at this point also acknowledge the presence of Her Excellency Ambassador Eradica Araceli Paz Campos of the Embassy of Mexico. Your Honors, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have just opened the 2006 Global Forum on Liberty and Prosperity. May I at this point make the following administrative announcements. Our dinner reception this evening will be hosted by the Canadian International Development Agency, or CIDA, and this will be held at the Cultural Center of the Philippines at 6:30 in the evening. Assembly area is the Rizal Lobby, which is near the registration booth. Air-conditioned coasters will transport our delegates to the venue, starting at 5:30 this afternoon. You may wear your formal evening attire or Filipiniana, and please don't forget to wear your IDs. Thank you, Your Honors, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Have a pleasant afternoon.
So much to do, and see there's a lot to learn in me. See you in Manila.
Smiley faces you'll see, there's a sun for you and me. Surely you will want to stay. See you in Manila.
Walk along the boulevard,
Find a friendly star. So why not keep it up a while?
we don't stop Manila.
Won't you come along with me? There's so much to do and see.
She will steal your heart away. Yes, she will, Manila. Dreams become reality, Manila. You'll discover what it's like, Manila, Manila. Walk down the river, stroll in the park, watch the glorious sunset by the bay. You are in for some good, nice drive, or kare-kare. Savor the flavor of the tropical sun in the glass of San Miguel beer.
Every day is a beautiful fiesta. This is the life, this is the life. Won't you come along with me?
Stroll in the park, watch the glorious sunset by the bay. You are in for some good, nice drive, or kare-kare. Savor the flavor of the tropical sun in the glass of San Miguel beer. This is our life.
Won't you come along with me? There's so much to do and see. She will steal your heart away. Yes, she will. Manila, Manila, Manila.
mo inumin, baka sa bill namin may something.
Na ako. Yung nasa ref. Yung step away from.
Tapos na trabaho niya?
Mamaya pa. Oh. Pero mamayang gabi sa PICC.
Daw.
Tapos na ako.
Uli ka na? Kaya, pagod.